strategy,
design,
marketing,
UX,
digital.
development.
This is Agencies That Build. This show is dedicated to leaders and teams that design and deploy in the digital world. My name is Jessie, and I'm a marketer and an agency owner.
And I'm Varun. I'm not a marketer, but a coder and an agency partner.
This show is sponsored by Together We Ship,
On a mission to help agencies grow.
Rock on. Here we are. Hi, Varun. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. How are you? Who do we have
I'm
today?
good. Today, I'm excited to chat with our guest today. So he's an entrepreneur. He's a thought leader. He's a former lacrosse player for the Boston Cannons and the New York Lizards. I will say, if you've never been to a professional lacrosse game, it's really fun. He is the co-founder of the Gnar Company, Mike Stone. Welcome to the podcast, Mike. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So let's dive right in, because I know you're prepped and ready to go with what myths you would like to smash, what bogus strategy you would like to set the record straight on. What do you got?
So my myth or bogus strategy is that now is most important. And I think especially small startups that need to be moving fast, oftentimes will prioritize the now so much that it makes the future harder, and the nows that come in the future kind of harder to move fast and execute on. We find this sometimes with engineering best practices that we'll push for, or test-driven development, things like that, where a common response will be, we'll add tests or do things right after we launch. And then after launch, there's another pressing issue and another pressing issue. And that tech debt mounts and mounts and mounts. And there's not often a intentional strategy to pay that down. So that priority on the now leads to an eventual time when the movement and the sprint forward can kind of come to a grinding halt.
So when you say tech debt, can you give just an example? That way we're all speaking the same language for those who may not. I mean, I can assume what it is, but just for clarity's sake.
Yeah. So as you develop new features and add to your code base, you can add debt to it, which might be like untested parts of logic, or just like kind of cruft that builds. Maybe it's repeated code in a bunch of places because you didn't want to encapsulate logic, or couldn't take the time to do that. Or maybe you're just not taking enough time to really think through a solid data model for the problem you're trying to solve. And over time, you kind of mount on this tech debt because you're trying to move really fast right now. And then at a certain point, you might find yourself with so much tech debt that kind of doing anything in your application takes a lot of time. Whereas it's kind of impossible to not add any debt, but by moving a little bit slower and a little bit more intentionally, you can actually kind of keep up the pace over time, the velocity over time. And so that's kind of what I'm referring to with tech debt.
So I can relate to that so much, because we have several experiences where customer would not be willing to spend time in having us do a thorough assessment or a discovery or analyze what currently is in the system that they have built. They just want us to start and go. Or even when we are starting a new project, you brought the test-driven development piece. Like, yes, not everybody wants to spend time and money into that. And the part of the reason what I understood was, yes, there is significant amount of investment you put into it, but it does go a long way in the long-term solution. But I would like to ask you, so in our case, we do so many variety of projects. Not every project may need that detailed assessment or detailed plan of doing, going deep dive into the architecture and discovery and all of that. But there are projects where you do want to spend that time for longer term. So what is your experience? You do variety of projects as well, different type of clients, different styles. How have you navigated that customer conversation? How do you convince them, or where you have failed of not doing that? Do you do all the time as a rule, or you don't do it? Like, what's your take on making sure you are picking the right direction for your customer?
I think that's a really good point. And one thing I've learned from doing all these projects is there aren't really rules in this space. Because there's outliers to kind of any path that you could take. And so what I'm referring to is maybe like the bulk of the types of projects that we do. But there's a couple of things there, because there's one, it's like the recommended path might vary depending on the use case or the app that's being built. And the other piece is, you got to find the right development partner. There might be some development partners that work really well with a certain type of path, and other ones that work well with a different path. And what we like to do, and what we found to be successful, is whenever possible, if we can kind of prototype something on the design side before we get into engineering, it can help us to really know what we're going to build, and then be really intentional with our engineering decisions and get faster iterations on the design side. Because it's much faster to move pixels around in, Illustrator and Vision or Zeppelin or wherever you're designing, Figma, than it is to actually code that work. And so we can work very like hand in hand with the client to make sure everything is going to look right, and then focus our engineering efforts on making that come to life. And it's something we've had some pushback from clients on in the past, because it has an appearance of moving slower, where they just want to start building right away. And we make a lot of analogies between building an application, a web application, and like construction, where you can't just start swinging hammers. You need a blueprint first. And we, have had to take on a lot of projects that maybe didn't follow some of these best practices, and add tests, and maybe move too fast, and have had to shore them up and get them back to a place where we can continue to run and build with them. But when we start projects from scratch, we often try to front load some of that design so that we can hit the ground running. But again, that's just one path, and it's not always possible, but it's a common path that we see.
It's like trying to build a cake and running out of flour in the middle. Like, why would you ever do that? But trying to not build a cake, but make a cake. It all
Sound
comes
like-
back to food.
Is that a pain point you've experienced recently?
No, but it's like, if you're going to go, it's like when you're going to make a recipe and you realize, you're like, okay, I'm going to start cooking, because you're like so excited and you're hungry, and you realize, well, I don't have enough flour, and then I don't have baking soda, and then, oh shoot, I ran out of salt. It's like, you should probably make sure you have your ingredients in place before you get started cooking and crafting the whole thing. I know you mentioned a couple of design tools, and are there specific tools that you use with clients to be able to manage that process? Just out of curiosity, with folks listening, there's so many ways to do it, I'm assuming. Have you found one that works? I've used Figma and a couple of others like UI type tools in the past, but do you have a favorite?
Yeah, we're starting to use Figma more. In the past, we'd done like a combination of Sketch and Envision. Envision can be nice because it can provide a clickable prototype, and we find that showing clients that clickable prototype so they can experience the application can be really helpful. But Figma now has that ability as well. So we have been moving a bit towards Figma, but there's still, depending on how long we've been working on a project, there's some fluctuation there.
So many times, technology offers several advantages which the customers are not aware of. I want to take this point back to what earlier you said earlier about, having them create a blueprint and do a discovery. So what are some of the best practices that you might have identified or adopted that helped you identify those gaps and educate your customer about the importance of doing the deep dive before you get into the building stuff? Because as an agency, when you are positioning yourself as full service, you start from strategy, then design, dev, and then ongoing support and maintenance. We have experienced that as a challenge to sell discovery, to help them understand the idea of creating the blueprints. So I know many other agencies also struggle with this. They all want to do discovery. It makes total sense, but they still struggle. They still find it hard to convince the customer. So I was wondering if how have you been successful, if you have been successful, and if there are any tips and tricks that you can share.
We've certainly had pushback on it in the past. I think just talking through the value of it, making some of those analogies, and also showing the final products of how other design and discovery engagements have gone have been encouraging for folks to see. One, it's relatively inexpensive, much less expensive than engineering work. And once you show the result of, this is what we did for somebody similar to you, they kind of get blown away. And I think when we've had clients that are maybe on the fence about it and then have decided to do it, they always get blown away at the end about like how great it looks, how good the user flows are. And they really value that process in hindsight. But sometimes it can be a little bit more of a struggle to get people to buy in. But from our perspective, we really can't just start swinging hammers. We need to provide the engineering team with a blueprint and a sense of what they're going to build, and it can't just be, I need an app that does this. We really need to be able to like visualize that and see how it's going to come together and what those user flows are in order to get started.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I totally agree with you. An engineering team does need the proper and detailed inputs from the design or discovery, because then only they can find and identify the right solution. So when it comes to building phase or developing phase, what is that makes your team so effective in creating and building? Like what makes you different than others? Like what,
You might say, why are you guys so gnarly?
Right.
See what I did there?
I do. Very good. I think that over time, we've built a repeatable process that's really effective at being able to move quickly while also providing a really high quality product. And what that often looks like is starting out with that design discovery, so we really know what we're going to build, and that helps us. Like when we start on a project, when we get into engineering, we know exactly what we need to build, and oftentimes there'll be some parts of design that maybe are out of scope or that we're going to phase into another part of the project or something like that. But for the most part, our engineering team can take the design and start building it out. And so we'll often use we use Agile software development. It's almost like a mix actually of Waterfall and Agile, because we've almost waterfalled the design side where we really push the client to think through what their product's actually going to do and what it's going to look like and the different flows. And then we get that into development, and from there it works in a pretty agile way, and sometimes we'll circle back to design and then back into engineering. But it works really nicely because we can really hit the ground running on the engineering side, and we'll break down the design into user stories essentially. So looking at everything as a whole and sort of dividing up epics for each one of big chunks of functionality, and then within each epic into these like minute user stories, and then we prioritize those. We use often Jira, but there's a million project management software out there that you can build a backlog of those user stories and start to prioritize. And we really involve the client the whole way. I mean, some of the minutia of it we take care of like writing up the tickets and stuff like that, especially if the client's not technical or something like that. But we want to make sure that what we're working on is the highest priority to the client, and so we try to push to production regularly. We're having agile ceremonies throughout the week, like sprint plannings and retrospectives, to make sure we're on track, we're working on the most pressing things, and our relationship with our client is strong. And that's where it can be that's where it can involve design again a little bit. If we get a product out into users' hands early, maybe some feedback from the client or from users makes the client decide, I actually want to pursue this direction a little bit more than what we initially talked about. And we're easily able to kind of move in those different directions and stay agile, and try to just get product into users' hands early and often.
So you spoke about several tools as a part of Agile process. So you follow Agile pretty well. I'm going to ask you, and it's okay if you don't know the answer, but I still ask, if you know an example or an instance where the Agile process might not have worked for you. I know everybody talks about Agile, everybody knows the benefits and you should do it, but if it has not worked for you, can you think about any instance?
I mean, I haven't come across any. I could imagine if you're like, building software that's gonna like operate a rocket ship or something like that, that you kind of have to build something like that in an agile way, where you'd be putting people at risk if you didn't cover all your bases ahead of time or something like that. But I mean, I've heard of agile working in all different industries, companies of all different sizes. Certainly in my personal experience in different industries and company sizes and problem domains, it's been very effective. So I think it's an outlier when you'd have to waterfall something, though, I'm sure those cases do exist.
Yeah. And in the design phase, you definitely, you do it yourself. You do follow waterfall when you are designing, because that time you have a very clear, or at least there's a time bounded, this is what we need to do, and then this is fixed time frame, fixed cost. After that, whatever happens in engineering, it's all free flowing. It is going to be dependent on how quickly you can get to the market, stay agile, and get to the hands of the users and get feedback as soon as possible. So that's what your approach has been.
Right. And that's how we came about that process, is that we'd have clients that would say, how much is it going to cost to build this application? And we'd say, well, we don't know what the application is yet, so we don't know. And so what we ended up doing was saying, we can do this design discovery engagement that is relatively inexpensive and will be helpful for you in figuring out exactly what this application's going to be. And it'll be really helpful for us to figure out what that is going to be. And then at the end of that, we can give them a really fine-grained estimate on what the development of that application is going to be. So it makes our estimates really clear. It kind of sets a stage for a really good client relationship. And then we still charge time and materials in the engineering phase so that we can be agile and we can change direction as needed instead of having to deal with change orders and all of that. But the client at least has expectations of what the cost is going to be, and it allows us to really clearly communicate if that's going to change based on how the direction of the application development changes.
Ever had a client who's gone through that? I mean, because I feel like the discovery process is something a lot of people in the agency world and consulting world we go back and forth about. We all know we should get paid for it. I'm just going to say it. There's a myth that we should bust right there. Do you charge for it? How do you charge for it? Outside of those questions, you ever had people who've gone through the discovery for you guys at Gnar and say, yeah, we can't afford that, we're good, and they move on, and they haven't accepted, and I guess that's a yes, no question. Yeah. Or just like, yeah, we don't really want to do that. Like, thanks for the discovery, we're going to take our business. Like, how do you even deal with something like that? Like, that's
totally. Yeah. We encourage them to do that too. Like, the design and development aren't tied together. I think we have a really great design discovery process, whether you work with us on engineering or not. Most of the time, people do the engineering side of the work as well. And we always provide them with an estimate so that they know kind of what they'd be getting into there. But we also always encourage clients to get quotes from other places too. And sometimes they will go. So I mean, sometimes budget is a real issue. That's usually the reason why somebody would go somewhere else, because also in doing the design discovery engagement, we build a relationship with the client and they get to know what working with us would kind of look and feel like. And oftentimes that's really positive. So then they want to keep working with us. When budget is an issue, sometimes we'll try to help find a lower cost option or encourage them to search around and find another lower cost option, but they still have those resources. They own that prototype that was built for them and the designs that were built for them. So they won't have to do that all over again. They can bring that somewhere else. It's rare, but it happens.
I want to switch directions and bring you to the thought about going back in the days, when you started the company. What was the thought? Why did you start the Gnar Company? Like, what was, other than, running a business, making money and all that, what was
going
the
from
purpose?
Professional sports into running
Exactly.
an agency? That was, take us through that. Not to cut you off, Arun, but
You're right.
It
You
certainly
put it right.
wasn't a direct path. So the short version of the story is that I was playing professional lacrosse in Boston. I started a different company. It was called Giving Something. The idea was to help nonprofits receive in-kind donations and in turn further connect nonprofits with their donor base. So like instead of giving a $20 check to the Boys and Girls Club, you could give them a basketball and they could send you a picture of somebody playing with that basketball and make that connection really strong. So when playing professional lacrosse, it's not like playing a Big Four sport. You don't get paid a lot of money and the demand on your time isn't as high. So I started that Giving Something business at that time. And that was my intro into technology too. I didn't know how to code at the time and basically taught myself with Giving Something how to code, and realized in that process that I really loved to code and wanted to just learn more and learn more. So Giving Something was ultimately unsuccessful and we had to fold. And I just decided that I was going to be a software engineer now, or that was my goal. So I went back to school, did General Assembly boot camp to learn how to code professionally, and then got a job at a company called MIU Health, which was a health and wellness startup in Boston. And that's where I met my co-founder, Nick, and Pete Whiting, and where kind of Gnar was, I guess, born at, because so a few years into MIU Health, the company wasn't doing so great, and it was clear that there was going to be a round of layoffs. I really credit that team for being so transparent in a really difficult time, and just kind of letting everybody know that maybe the end was near. And so there'd be just kind of buzz around what are people going to do next. And Nick had worked previously at Terrible Labs, which was a consultancy in Boston, and had some idea of starting a consultancy. He knew about my background with Giving Something, and we got paired up. We weren't on the same team or anything. There was another person that kind of helped pair us up. And once we just kind of started building it nights and weekends, and once the layoffs happened, we transitioned to full-time and started the two of us, and then continued to grow from there.
And how big are you right now? How many people?
About 20 full-time engineers.
In 5 years, 20 people, it's a pretty fast growth. It's fascinating to hear that. I mean, especially in the agency world, 20 people is great.
We've tried to be pretty conservative. I think the nice thing too is that there's so much demand for agency work. So there's a lot of like co-opetition too. We have a lot of development partners and design partners and infrastructure partners, where if there's a project that's not right for us, we can refer it out, or others will refer work in. And so there's been pretty high demand since we've started, and we've tried to be really conservative in our growth and not just try to race and have a roller coaster ride of hiring and layoffs and all of that. But we don't have layoffs, and have been able to just kind of slowly but surely grow the team, and now yeah, pretty substantial size.
I want to talk about that, the concept or the idea of working with partners. How I mean, clearly it has been working very well for you, and it otherwise, as you said, like your growth has been conservative. What you would have hired someone in-house. So the idea of partnering with other people, other agencies, can you share some experiences around what have you learned in working with the agency or other partners? Like, what should people keep in mind when looking for a partner? What should they avoid? What should they look for? How do you pick the right partner? Because I mean, I totally agree with you. Like for agencies, it makes so much sense. You stay small and then you expand your network, especially when you are positioning yourself as full service. You are not niching. So when you are offering to everybody, you want to have network of people that you can rely on. So what have your learnings been?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I found that it can be really hard to find the right partner from the client side, especially if it's a client that's maybe not technical and can evaluate a partner from a technical side, or kind of go into the weeds. And same for design or infrastructure. It can be really difficult. And on top of that, you have to balance budget and quality. And it's tough to find a right answer. What we try to do is help the client, whether or not that means working with us. And so we've done code audits, for instance, because sometimes we'll have a client that comes to us that says, we need a lot of work. We had work done by another development partner. It didn't go so well. We want to work with you. And we'll first start out by taking a look at their code base and just making sure it's the right tech stack, and that it's the right project for us to take on. And if it is, great. But if it's not, we'll give them some advice, right? Of like, maybe there's a partner we know that can help them out. Maybe we can just say, here are some things to look for, some questions to ask when you talk to partners. It's not really like a one size fits all problem, but we certainly recognize how difficult it can be to find the right partner. I'm trying to think of like what I would tell somebody, but again, it's like so specific to what the actual challenges that client is facing, of kind of like how to help usher them in the right direction. But maybe asking consultancies or potential partners like what they're great at and what they're not so great at. And that way you can kind of figure out, maybe you need to pull together a couple of different pieces to make that work. And also just making sure the partnership feels right, that it's, you're not talking to a salesperson that's going to throw the project over the fence and not care about the success of the project, and that you feel comfortable that you found a partner that actually can deliver on what they're telling you they can.
Have you ever found a wrong partner in the past? Like, you have been working with partners, and there is always, like, you must have tried few, or maybe you were lucky enough to never have found a wrong partner. I mean, that would, like, we have partnered with other agencies as well in the past, and we know, like, now we have created like we always go through a referral network now. We don't go just hire anybody. Like in the beginning, we did try a bunch of agencies and smaller shops to where we needed support, but then we have had some bad experiences. So we decided, like, if we are going to work with partner, it has to be through a referral. And this other thing we did was making sure the project is still under our control. So our internal PM would still own the product, right? Even though we are subcontracting the work, we will not just give them the entire thing, because customer trusts us and we want to make sure we have the ownership. So is that something you guys do as well, or you have some other strategies to make sure that the work is, your customer is happy? Because that's the ultimate goal for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I think it is important for us, or for one partner, to own the project. And then if you need to bring on other partners, almost like, being a contractor or something with subcontractors, and you can kind of manage the overall work, but maybe you don't have all of the pieces. I do think that's important versus putting that burden on the client to manage all those moving pieces. So that definitely makes a lot of sense, and is something we do when we partner with folks. We've had, when we look to build out our like referral network or partners, we'll often try to use small projects and ideally internal projects to test out the working relationship. So last time that we rebuilt our website, we went to a new design partner. At that time, we didn't have design in-house. We now do, but we went to a partner to see if we could find another local partner to execute on the design. It didn't work out really well, and we ended up going back to our previous partner, and so that one, didn't work out, which was fine. At least we tried, but it also didn't impact any client work because we tried it, ourselves to make sure it would work first. So we try to do that sort of thing whenever possible.
When is there one key question, with the partner that it didn't work out with? I think that's always something someone's concerned about, is how do I make sure they're the right partner for me? Did you find, retrospectively, was there something you should have asked prior to working with them? Or you have any deep tidbit, or not even deep, just any sort of tidbit there that you might impart to folks listening as I feel like this partnership thing is something all of us, obviously we do a lot of that with folks. But even with looking for, when you're making a referral and someone might not be your ideal client, finding the right person to refer them out to and understanding that. So
yeah, and that's where it's so hard, because there's so many different types of partners, right? Is it a design partner? Is it a website partner? Is it a custom software partner? Is it a, database or infrastructure partner? And there might be kind of different things to ask each, and also who's the client, is the client technical? Is the client non-technical? Where it's hard to kind of hone in on a couple of things to ask for, or to really harp on in the evaluation. And then there's also, you want to make sure they're technically capable. You want to make sure you trust them, that they're organized, and you feel that they'll be able to effectively manage the project. So I think those things are the easier ones to maybe poke at. Is, can you give me an example of a project that is similar to this one that you've done in the past? Or can you walk me through how you manage a project? Those sorts of questions are easier to ask for really anyone that you'd be partnering with. But there's also a lot of kind of case by case type questions.
it's working with a lot of partners ourselves, it's also asking for the referral. I think is a good one. Can I talk to a client that you've worked with that might be similar? How do you
Totally
think? Another one is like, how do you prefer to work? Varun mentioned, like, we like to keep that PM internally and manage, that way. Or do you prefer a hand off and then a hand back, and they sign two separate contracts? I think those are important kind of things to work through in the beginning. I will ask, have you ever worked, you mentioned working locally with folks. Have you ever worked with anybody offshore? Have you experienced there at all? Outsourced?
I haven't. So we haven't partnered with any offshore agencies. I've worked at companies that have had like an offshore office. I think it was in India, the most recent example. And that worked really nicely, actually. Our team is onshore, and don't have a ton of experience working with
Not yet,
offshore.
anyways.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so I think
because you guys do a fair amount of offshore, right? You manage onshore, is that correct?
we do, but I think this is kind of a burning question and desire of many. I mean, we talk to a lot of agency owners these days, right? Especially after COVID, this has been a hot topic because people are thinking twice to bring everybody in-house or go nearshore, offshore. I mean, everybody can work from everywhere, right? So I know when we spoke last time, I think 2 months ago, you did mention that you don't do offshore at all. I would like to talk a little bit more about the thought process behind that especially after COVID, right? Especially after COVID, things have changed so much. And because of competitiveness in the domain, in this industry, agencies are feeling that pressure of cost when clients ask them about, they are getting the work, for cheaper because of everybody's everywhere, right? And they have their own people, they have their own contracts offshore, nearshore for lesser cost. And clients ask agencies about, if they can give discounts because they also know that work is being done everywhere around, on the other part of the world. So my question to you is, I know last time you said you don't do offshore. Right now, you said that you don't have anyone offshore in your team, but you did work with somebody who had offshore, and you had a good experience with that. With all of that, where are you heading? Like, what is your thought right now? How are you approaching? Do you still have, you still think that you will never do offshore? If yes, then why not? If no, then how will you navigate that decision making?
Mm-hmm. I think with the client that I worked on that had an offshore team, what worked really well is they really effectively managed that work. And I think that's been some of the challenge with us thinking about working with folks offshore. And the huge benefit is cost. I think the challenge is in our model, we don't have any PMs. So our engineers work directly with the client. And when offshoring, it can be challenging, mostly from like a time zone and language barrier perspective to make that model really work. I think where it can be very effective is when you have like a PM layer that can effectively manage the client and the development team to keep that work going. I think the quality of development can be good. It's more of the kind of management that can be challenging with the way that we structure our projects.
Yeah, that makes a total sense, because that is very true as well. From our experience, all the agencies that we have worked with, they all have the PM layer. They all have the technical PM or product manager who is the connection between the end client and the offshore team, and that makes the relationship so strong and very effective for everybody. We have several experiences where our team would work directly, and then that has not been successful that much. So that is definitely a missing piece. If you don't have the PM layer, it would be hard. So having said that, do you still see or experience that pressure of the cost from your client or not? I mean, you are like, how is your agency? Like, again, this reflects back to the COVID situation. Like, how has COVID changed the trajectory of your business growth, and how are you looking ahead after coming over like last from 2020?
Yeah, we certainly hear from like prospective clients from time to time that we're too expensive. That is a common bit of feedback that we receive on our prices. I think the way we position ourselves in the market is that we're not the most expensive that you're going to find, and we're not the cheapest you're going to find, but we I believe have very strong very high ROI and very strong value for the price. So we kind of play a bit in the middle, but the talent of our team and the way that we're able to execute on projects, you get really high value for what you're paying. And we've seen that really resonates and rings true with a lot of clients that we work with. But there are absolutely clients that it's still too expensive for, and that's fine, and we don't push back on that at all. But the reality is we pay our engineers a lot of money, and we need to be able to have a healthy business, and there becomes kind of a floor that we can work within. And we do pride ourselves on being flexible with clients and working however we can to make things work. So whether that's changing around start dates or number of engineers on projects or payment plans or whatever needs to happen to to work together. If there's a good fit, we'll do that. But sometimes at the end of the day, it's not possible, and it's best to kind of part ways or look elsewhere.
So I'm going to shift gears here for a minute in our conversation and move on to, let's talk about you a little bit, Mike. What do you do outside of work? You know, you have such an interesting trajectory to get into agency life. You know, what else? I know we were catching up a little bit before this recording. You've got some cool life stuff going on. Tell us a little bit about what you do outside of that might be so, I'm just going to say it again, gnarly. It's a good company name, you know, like why not?
I gotta say, naming companies is so hard.
So hard.
And we had a tough time. I love our company name, and it did come out of, we solve your gnarly problems is what it kind of came from. But it took us a long time to get there, of just names that missed, or we didn't like, or domain names were changed or taken. And but anyway, life outside of the Gnar is not super gnarly, but I do have some interests and stuff outside of work that I really enjoy. Biggest thing is I just had a son of about 6 weeks ago, and so learning how to be a dad has been my biggest priority. And my son Bowen's been amazing. Yeah, first son. And so that's just been fun, watching how he changes every day and each week. And then, in the time that I can find outside of work and dadding, I really enjoy sports. I play tennis and lacrosse a lot. We try to get outdoors as much as we can while the weather's good, and we'll go hiking around. I live in Westchester, New York, and there's a lot of like good hiking trails and stuff around here. So we try to stay outside and stay active as much as we can.
But do you find yourself, I'm always curious, like as a former professional athlete, do you find yourself missing or wanting to coach, or how does that translate into your outside life? I just know friends who grew up playing football and they're like, okay, I want to coach, and they can't keep their mouth shut and they want to participate. And none of them were professional. So I'm curious.
I was a coach for a very long time as well. It's a common other profession while you're a professional lacrosse player is, you fill in the time with coaching and doing camps and clinics and stuff like that to make money. And I did that for a long time. I burnt out pretty hard by the end of my professional career, where like I never wanted to touch a lacrosse stick again. And I didn't for a long time. And then in the last couple of years, I've like the love of the games come back a bit, which has been awesome, because I don't think I'll ever find another thing that I'm that good at. And so it's nice to love the thing that you're capable in. and I'm
outside
really
of dadding, right?
Well, I'm still learning there. And my goal is to be a better dad than lacrosse player. Wow, if I can't execute on that, it's bad. But it's been really nice to play again. So I don't quite have the itch to get back to coaching, but maybe when Bowen grows up, I'll coach his teams. I'm sure that'll happen.
I can write down right now that after 7 years to his first baseball game, you're going to coach him, or his soccer game, you're going to be the coach of his team. So
I'm sure that's going to happen, and I'll be like that annoying parent in the stands, like yelling, and yeah. I hope not, but I'll probably be embarrassing myself.
Yeah, you'll be great.
Oh no, you'll be embarrassing him. That's the way the game works, because you don't care at that rate. So
that's going to get yelled at in a lot of car rides.
Cut it out.
Right.
Well, we have one final question for you as we wrap things up. As an agency owner, we like to ask you, what's that one thing that keeps you up at night? What's the, lying in bed going, outside of sales?
And outside of putting your baby to sleep.
Oh, well, outside of actually going to bed, So, all of us say it's our next sale, it's our next client, we're looking for something a little bit more creative there, my friend.
Gotcha. The first thing that comes to mind would be because of my background with athletics, I just love being on teams. And a big part of what my role at the Gnar is outside of engineering is building the team. So that's often my huge focus, is just, making sure everyone's happy. If there's, any issues or challenges, making sure that, they're getting resolved, and we're all, fostering a strong culture and bringing on the right people. And that occupies a ton of space in my mind, and often, keeps me up at night. But I love doing it. And at the end, we have a wonderful team and a wonderful culture. And, I got to play a part in making that happen along with the rest of the team. And I'm proud of it. I'm proud of our team for it. And so it brings me a lot of joy, but it does keep me up a lot.
Well, so, okay, I lied. I have one more question because I can't help myself. This is a topic we talk with, I think, probably 100% of agency owners that we've interviewed on the podcast. How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them happy? Like, and I know that's a long answer. Give us, kind of one thing that you have found in that builder of culture that you're like, oh, this totally has worked, or we found that this weekly meeting kind of works, or some sort of tidbit or parting words.
I think the biggest thing that we do is that we're like very transparent and respectful of the people that we work with. So we're transparent with, how the company's doing. We have a quarterly meeting where we like open up the books and we talk about not only how are we doing financially, how all the projects that we're doing have contributed to that, and also what we're focusing on for the rest of the year, or how we have executed on the things that we've set out to do. And it's okay to fail. And we just are very open with that. And then we provide everybody with a lot of autonomy. So we're not micromanaging or looking over people's shoulders. We're trying to hire the right people and capable people, and let them do their job. And I think people really respond well to that.
I think that's such an interesting and great way, great way to end our conversation. But before we do that, I would say, I think that's something that a lot of folks pre-COVID struggled with, how to deal with that and how to be authentic and transparent. And we're finding, a lot of agency owners and ourselves, it's like we have to be, because people want that. As I've managed many a team, it's like I have an open door policy. I worked for a company years ago that said, if you ask questions, well, can you? Like, what kind of environment is that? And so you said a couple things, that it's this transparency, it's this openness, and we're here to help, and it's okay to fail. That's like really important, I think, components that have come out of that, honestly, that have come out of COVID, have, stuck with the retention of employees and things like that. So, well,
yeah, I think it, like with the change to remote as well, you have to be very intentional about those decisions and the ways that you do that too. Like we have a policy of like putting your video up when you do video meetings, so that you feel like a personal connection with people. And it's a very small thing, but I'm surprised how many companies don't do that, and the effect that it can have in just making people feel more comfortable with each other, or feel like they know each other more. And there's just a lot that you can do that's each piece is very small, but it can come together well. Like we have victory and defeat channels in Slack where people can say like, and oftentimes it has nothing to do with work, and that's okay too. But it, like, just the little things can really help people get to know each other and work well together and just be comfortable.
Imagine a world before Slack. I'll say it, like how would this have worked, man?
Seriously.
So, but well, this was a great conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time. And so where folks can find you, I believe you're on the LinkedIn, Michael V. Stone, if I'm not mistaken, and then simply the theyre.co. So thanks so much. for folks listening, that's it, everyone. If you learned something today or laughed, please tell someone about the podcast. Rock on. Have a great day. Thanks for listening. Find our other episodes on agencies.build.com. Plus, we're listed anywhere you find your favorite podcast.